Today, I want to talk about free speech. And the reason why is because I realized recently I've made quite a few videos that have been fairly critical of the Trump administration and everything that they've been doing. And rightfully so, I think, right? We have the wars going on, right? Israel going back in, bombing Gaza more, going back into Iran and starting things up with them again. We have the Ukraine-Russia thing going on. And so I think criticizing that, the Epstein list as well, absolutely. I think there's a lot of things to be critical of Trump about. But I have always maintained that having Trump elected was always the lesser of two evils. And I know you can look at, again, the videos that I've made and say, how can you possibly say that? You've been railing against all these awful things that have been going on. And I completely agree. But the reason why, and the thing that I think is most important, is because at the end of the day, we still have free speech. Whereas I think if the Democrats were elected back in, that would be considerably under threat. And so what I want to do today is take a look at Tucker Carlson, and he has a conversation with Senator Eric Schmitt. And the thing that's interesting about him is that he also, in addition to now being a senator, was also Attorney General for Missouri. So he has a very deep understanding of the law and kind of what has been happening in the last few years, and he just has a very interesting take on that. So he brings something up here where he's talking essentially about freedom of speech and how, I think there are certain things that happened in the last few years that people may not be aware of. I know personally I had talked previously about the Ministry of Truth, which I bring up, as well as the lack of a primary for Kamala Harris during her run-up to the presidency, right? No one got to vote her in. But I think the other thing that often gets left out, and that even sometimes I don't mention, is the censorship that was happening on social media. And that's particularly what this video concentrates on. And so I'm going to talk about that, view what they have to say, and then add in my thoughts as well to that. So let's begin, and then we'll see what they have to say and what I have to say about it.
Basic in the Missouri versus Biden case, when we got favorable rulings, not only the district court, the appellate court, really went on a limb and said this is the most egregious violation of the First Amendment we've seen in American history. When you look at the sprawling expanse of the agencies that were captured by this.
Okay, so would you mind telling that story just from beginning to end? Because I think even people who are interested in the topic may not fully appreciate what happened.
So the Biden administration comes in, and on the third day in office, start to begin to hammer this home. Now, there had been semblances of this that predate the Biden administration, in that the FBI, for example, when we took the deposition of Elvis Chan, he was the FBI guy in Northern California that's working with the big tech companies, okay? Even in the Trump administration, the FBI was working with Democrat staffers to connect with big tech companies to look for things to censor under the guise of Russian disinformation, right? This was the thing. Again, it's kind of a legacy of what that hoax really meant for the country. That foundation was laid down for a lot of folks in the administrative state or the deep state, whatever you want to call it, as a way to...
And this is something to point out. And I voted independent, right? So because I thought it, to me, the reason why is that I thought such an amount of people would be so fed up with the way things went with Biden and just hated Trump from, basically how it looked in 2020. So many people came out to vote against him. I figured all of those people, or at least a good majority of them, would essentially be so fed up with the system that they would vote essentially third party as a protest vote. So for me, I looked at as if there were enough votes cast for the independent, we would essentially be able, we being everyone who voted for a third party, would essentially provide enough support, which is 5%. If they receive 5% of the vote, then they can be fully represented in an election. So instead of 2 and then, kind of a throwaway, they would have to automatically be included in all the debates. So instead of just Republican versus Democrat, well, now you have a third party up there as well. So that's how I voted, all cards on the table. But when you're looking at why I think Trump is better to get in, despite all the warts, is that this is a good example of where my mind goes, where I say, yes, I would prefer him in. And this is just one of the examples, is that essentially we have Eric here saying, and this is patently true, the FBI was working against him the entire time. So in my mind, when I'm seeing that happen, right, because I think it was just completely obvious, right? There's the whole Russian hoax thing, like he was saying, literally the entire time that Trump was in office. So that, to me, what that says is that essentially entrenched interests do not want Trump to be in office. And when I see that, that says, yes, then I want him in. Now, again, do I think he's playing ball more this time around? Do I think he's more swamp-like than he was, right? I think the first time he just couldn't really get much done. And then this time he's just speed running through everything that he wants to get through, but not actually getting through the things that we want. Some of it, yes, but not nearly everything that I think people expected him to do. But just in this point to the FBI working against him, when I see the FBI or the CIA or whatever working against any person, to me, that's a flag that this is the person I want in office. So just off the bat, that's number one, my point about the FBI working against Trump.
Undermine an agenda under the guise of this is misinformation or disinformation. So when Biden comes into office, all these agencies that are galvanized, you're mentioned, actually very ironically, Tucker Carlson was mentioned, Alex Berenson was mentioned, RFK Jr. were mentioned in these emails about people promoting vaccine hesitancy or these sort of things that they wanted to stamp out. So you couldn't have a debate, right? You couldn't have a debate about things. They just wanted those voices silenced, deplatformed. And
that's a huge point as well that I want to bring up, is that especially during COVID, you literally couldn't say anything against essentially the COVID regime, if you will, without being censored. And you saw this many times. Anyone who Joe Rogan had on was censored, essentially, right? And we'll circle back around on that a little bit later. But yeah, anyone, even people who were very well credentialed, were all completely silenced when it came to this sort of thing. And that's the thing, is the way that they went about doing it in using social media companies to silence basically allows them to say, oh no, you can say whatever you want, but then they throttle the reach of those posts. And that's the thing, is that they just don't want the information out there. And that's a huge overstep of freedom of speech. And I think that there needs to be huge reform on these social media platforms, that you're not able to censor people, because in a marketplace of ideas, you should be able to just go out there. I say what I have to say, someone else has, they say what they have to say, and the public, each person, can make up their mind who they want to side with. That's just how free speech is supposed to go, and that's how the marketplace of ideas, you're supposed to win in that arena.
How do you do that? Since it is so obviously unconstitutional, every child knows that.
Well, that's correct. The government can't do it, and they shouldn't be able to outsource it either, which is what was happening. So they're outsourcing their censorship to some of the biggest companies in the history of the world. And so we had some sense of this.
Wait, can I just ask?
And before we get too far away from that, the mechanics of how they do that, or why they're able to, is they essentially have a protection where they are not viewed as, they aren't publishers, right? What they are is they identify themselves as just kind of marketplaces where they allow people to have conversations. So they don't actually work as a publisher, so that they don't have liability for what people say on the platform. So like if I make a video where I make some outlandish claim and it's completely, false, they don't get slammed for libel, because in lawfare, what would happen is that, or slander, or whatever medium I use to make the claims. What happens in lawfare, or what would happen, is that instead of going after me, they would go after these social media companies, because they have the deeper pocket, right? Because for me, I could just file bankruptcy and you're not going to get anything out of me. Whereas these media, social media companies, what you could do is go after them, and they're multi-billion-dollar companies. So you could settle much larger lawsuits and basically eat into the money that they make. Or it would completely bankrupt them, because, again, the amount of content that's being created at all times it's just unrealistic that anyone would be able to view it all and, basically censor the stuff that needs to be censored. So instead what happens is they get a different designation, so that basically no one can go after them, and they're not designated as endorsing the speech that's going on there. But at the same time, behind the scenes, what they can do is they can tweak things in the algorithm so that certain things can be either promoted and it gets more views, or basically downranked and no one sees it. So in those instances, basically the government was going and threatening to sue them and take away their protections that I just outlined, in order for them to basically derank what's going on. And so that's, again, I just wanted to interrupt and kind of provide that interjection of, this is how essentially these social media companies are able to kind of skirt the law and have the best of both worlds, if you will.
I mean, there are lawyers involved in every decision that the executive branch makes. So White House counsel signs off on that?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, in a weird quirk of history, James Baker, who was the general counsel for the FBI,
yes,
goes, and after he does his stint at Brookings, goes and is the general counsel for Twitter. So one hand washes the other. They were more than willing to work with the Biden administration to censor points of view on that platform. So you have people who were in this kind of ecosystem all along that were, it didn't take much convincing. But the Biden administration knew that they needed to silence this sort of level of dissent. It was Hunter Biden laptop. It was certainly during COVID, any kind of questioning of election results or whatever. I mean, all this stuff was on the table. And what they did.
And I think some of that is more credible than others, right? Like, I think the Hunter Biden laptop, 100%, it shouldn't have been censored. It obviously was, right? I had heard about it, but it definitely was not able to reach the average person, if you will. I'm a little bit more online. So I saw it, but yeah, of course it was censored. No one knew about it, because if you knew that there was essentially Joe Biden getting kickbacks, or heavily implied that he was getting kickbacks from Hunter Biden trading in his family's name for influence, and that's what was essentially, obviously there was all the drug stuff and the guns and the prostitution, and there were a lot of other things that were not even implicated, just directly found out on the laptop. But a huge portion of that was, if that was a talking point that Donald Trump could leverage, and that was a whole news cycle, and everyone had to confront what was going on with corruption and, trading name for favor, then yeah, I think the election results probably would have been vastly different. But that's the thing with it, is that wasn't allowed to circulate, so then Biden gets elected. But again, that's just one of the things that they did. But it's, and then he also talks about the election results, which is the thing about election result denial is that every single, basically every single group claims that there's foul play when they lose. And quite frankly, I just find it exasperating. Like, it's so annoying just to hear both sides just, oh, there was whatever, election interference from the other side. They had to have, I mean, just think about this last one, right? Elon Musk won him the election, won Trump the election. He had to have went in and messed with the systems because he knew at a certain point in the night that it was over and Trump was going to win. And then, going back to Trump saying that, they were hiding ballots, and the whole thing is just, I'm so done with it. Both sides are just ridiculous when it comes to this. Like, just lose step out graciously, and if you want to come back and run again, then come back and run again, I guess. But, like, come on, man. I hate those claims so much, but both sides do it. Like, if you hate it when the other side does it, well, guess what? Your side does it too. So denounce it on both fronts.
As they worked, as we took the deposition, this sort of plays out. But Jen Psaki's at the podium, if you recall, saying, we're flagging things that we find offensive for Facebook. Joe Biden is threatening to take away Section 230 protections. What's Section 230 protections? Those are basically, in the 1990s when the internet becomes a thing in the Telecommunications Act, they say that these are platforms that can't be sued, unlike publishers who can be sued. Publishers are supposed to be more arbiters of what you can say. It's why CNN gets sued by President Trump for false things. But like Twitter, Facebook, those are considered platforms. So they're immune from lawsuits. So Joe Biden starts threatening Section 230 protections. They start threatening investigations.
So if someone libels you on social media.
And that's exactly what I'm saying, or what I was explaining, basically.
Media, you can sue the person, but you cannot sue the company that hosted it. Whereas if someone libels you in a newspaper or television channel, you can sue the newspaper or television channel. That's
right. Okay. And so Section 230 protection is a multi-billion-dollar sort of subsidy in some ways. Yeah. Now, I happen to think, look, if you're actually having this platform where people can express their point of view, that's a great thing.
Amen.
But that's not what was happening, right? Through immense pressure from the government.
And the one thing that I will say on that front is that it essentially, and I pointed it out right when I was explaining it, but just to retouch on it, is that, the amount of content, I mean, just think about, having to go in and audit your aunt's insane Facebook rant, like, times that by, billions of people. Like, it is not necessarily a bad thing that they have this protection, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. And when you're actually censoring, again, you just need to be, if you're a platform, you need to be a free speech platform. And to his point, that's not what was happening. If you're censoring speech, well, now you're exercising editorial control, and that's not acceptable. Again, that's trying to have your cake and eat it too. You're claiming to not be responsible for the speech, but yet you're policing the speech. And so if that's happening, then you should lose that, that protection, essentially, in my opinion.
They were censoring all sorts of things.
How do they do that? How does the president or his staff exert pressure on, say, Facebook or Google or Twitter? So they had direct lines of communication. They had a secret portal where executives from these social media companies could communicate directly with high-ranking White House officials. Rob Faraday, who was the deputy communications guy in the Biden White House, was in constant communication, berating these people, telling them that it's not good enough. You need to do more. Let me assure you, this is coming from the highest levels of the administration. Those sorts of things were constantly streaming at the social media companies. And then you also had, as we took the deposition in that case of people from the CDC, they literally, the CDC were just giving the.
And before we go on to the CDC portion of it, that is what has been said from the people who own the platforms as well. So if you remember the Twitter files, when Elon bought Twitter and basically went through and allowed a bunch of different journalists to go in and flush out exactly what had happened there, going into all the emails and everything else and figuring out exactly these relationships that were had between the FBI or CDC or whoever and essentially the censorship people within the platforms, Twitter for the Twitter files, but then also Mark Zuckerberg has talked about this as well when he went on Joe Rogan, and he told him point blank, that's literally what would happen, is the government would reach out to him and tell him these are the things that, and I think he talked about it in the case of the Hunter Biden laptop story, but he made allusions that it happened for a lot of different things. And so that's the thing, is that they're capitulating to what the government is telling them that they need to censor. And then again, that is a huge infringement on the freedom of speech. And the other thing that's important to bring up, I think, about that as well, is that, and this is why I say, for all the warts, I'm glad that Donald Trump got in versus Kamala Harris, is that is not happening under this administration, right? How many videos have you seen that have went viral about Jeffrey Epstein? That to me is the biggest example of why you know that the Trump administration is not policing speech on these platforms, is that stuff like that is continually able to blow up and get huge amount of traction, and it's not being completely covered up, and you're not seeing it, right? You're able to see all of the conversation on Jeffrey Epstein, all of the connection with Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. And so, again, just that alone is a much better outcome, because if you don't have that, then it's a very quick descent into totalitarianism and authoritarianism. And that is something that I think no one in the US wants. And so again, when I criticize all the things with Donald Trump, like Jeffrey Epstein, like these wars, like the continual backing of Israel when they're essentially, in my opinion, committing a genocide, well then, by that same result, it's still a better outcome, because here in the US, at least we have free speech, and there's a reason that is the number one thing that all Americans, the right that all Americans have. There's a reason why that's number one, because that's the most important. And if you can censor the speech, then again, that's going down a very dark path.
And lines that they should censor. So the government is saying censor these exact phrases, right? That is exactly what they're giving this off to the social media companies. If this is uttered, we want you to silence these people. You want to deplatform these people. You want me to downgrade, throttle these sort of posts. We had the deposition.
Is that legal?
No, it's not legal.
And that's the thing. There are so many people who essentially were standing up, especially during COVID, were standing up against even just saying simple things like the coronavirus came from Wuhan. If you said that, your account would be completely nuked, or there's a possibility of it, right? If you got too many views on it, too many eyes on it. And so when that would happen, again, there's still people that are probably having their accounts affected by it today, or claim to have their accounts still affected by it today. And that's the exact thing, is that these are things that are completely true now. And that's not even, I could point to other instances that are more controversial where they have said it and I think have been proven to be true, but they still want to run denial on it. But even something so mundane and so pedestrian as the coronavirus came from most likely the Wuhan, lab for coronaviruses, which again, everyone will admit is true now, even the CDC, the WHO themselves, but you couldn't say that, and people are still silenced for it today. And so that's why this is so important, and why I think, again, say what you will, say what I will, because I'll criticize it too, this is still the better outcome.
So if it's illegal, then that by definition means it's a crime, and aren't crimes supposed to be punished?
Yes, they should be. Absolutely. But we sued the government to show censorship. A lot of social media companies have been sued before in other cases, but those ended up in the Northern District of California, never to be seen again. What was unique about our case, the Missouri versus Biden case, we sued, White House officials. We named them, personally. We named all these agencies, and we got to take their depositions. CISA, which is an agency I know you're familiar with, but maybe in your audience, probably of all audiences would know, is the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Administration, Security Administration. Their job purportedly was to make sure that our infrastructure is resilient against cyber attacks. They were very much involved in something called the Election Integrity Project, where they outsourced their censorship to Stanford and the University of Washington to flag certain posts that would then be given to social media companies to censor. The CDC was involved with it. CISA was involved with it. The FBI, of course, played a role with the pre-bunking of the Hunter Biden laptop, which they knew was actually real. They knew it was real. They had it in their possession. And
the other thing that's wild to think about this is that how does it get to be that pervasive of an issue where all of these different organizations have direct lines into these social media companies? Like, that's the thing you kind of have to think about, right? Is that you think, how is it so well known? How is it that each one of these has a direct line in? Like, again, just in he's naming 2 universities, CDC, FBI. I guarantee you there are other agencies that have a direct line into them. And so that's how you can tell, and why I think it's a much bigger issue than I think most people would even think about it, right? To think of. It's a much bigger and more pervasive issue is because everyone has their hand in the pot, and there's so many things they can censor. I guarantee, although maybe they're working through the CDC, but like Pfizer, Moderna, like all these companies probably also have some sort of feedback loop to get into and censor on these platforms. And that's just a huge issue, because how many people, just talking about COVID, again, myself as one of them, how many people had negative health outcomes from getting the shot and were completely silenced? Even today, I made a video where I talked about the negative effects that I had from COVID. It completely blew up with people that I'm personally connected with. And what you would think is that, and this is kind of a peek behind the curtain, right? What usually happens when something like that happens, I get all the people, a lot of interest in it. It gets the highest amount of views in the shortest amount of time. Well, then you would think that YouTube would go, okay, this is a really popular video. We're going to push it out and more people are going to see it. That wasn't the case at all. They completely killed it. It was literally, and what I will admit to and say could be the case, again, I want to present both sides fairly. What could be the case is, well, no one really cares about that much anymore. That's not really a hot topic. Okay, that's fine. But at the same time, it was something that was very heavily interested in. It got the longest viewership times. It had the highest conversion rates. But then YouTube, for whatever reason, decided not to push it out more generally. And that could just be a feedback loop of, we get advertisement dollars from, and that's another perverse incentive, but we get advertisement dollars from Pfizer and Moderna, so we don't want to promote anything on our platform that is critical of them. Okay, fine, whatever. But at the same time, again, how do you not, it's just an example of what is still going on today, where I think there is still some sort of censorship, but because it's not such a hot topic, no one really cares. No one is really that interested. And again, that's just a personal example of what has happened to me. But yeah, it still could be going on today, and who knows, because you can't see behind the curtain on their side. So all I can say is that it looks fishy to me in my experience in making videos and editing and uploading, and I do the whole thing in-house. So like I have a full understanding of what's going on, and to me, I would think that video would have been pushed out really widely and would have done really well, but it just wasn't served up from YouTube at all.
They pre-bunked it, and then when it came out, they never actually said, when people were asking, is this legitimate? They never actually said, no, we have it. So they were very much a part of this. operation to silence millions of American voices. And I think, for me, the First Amendment...
How many people have been fired at the FBI for that?
I don't know the answer to that.
Right around zero.
Yeah. And this is the kind of accountability.
Like, what the hell is that?
Yeah. And that's something that, as we talked to, Kash Patel in his confirmation hearings, is certainly something that we talked about. He's very well.
And that's the thing, too, is that no one is ever held accountable for this stuff. And that is deeply frustrating because, to me, if you don't take corrective action and if people aren't put in jail for infringing on free speech, all that basically says is that when Trump is out, if it goes back to the Democrats and they still have this same, if it's the same neocons, authoritarian-leaning people that they have running for office now, or who were in office 4 years ago, right? Or, all the way through the term of the Biden presidency. But if you have those same people that just come right back into office again, well, then who's to say that they don't crack down even harder? Because anyone who got caught doing this hasn't been prosecuted. There's no consequences. So let's just pick right back up where we started last time, and let's crack down even harder, because no one has essentially experienced any negative effects from their actions. And that, to me, is deeply troublesome, to say the least.
Where I think having somebody like that who was on the other side of it is a good thing, but we certainly need to have more accountability. But these people, it's just the scale of it was immense. And it really wasn't exposed until we filed the lawsuit again.
And that's the exact thing that I was saying before is, with all these agencies, all the ones that he just listed, and I guarantee you there's even more, having their hand in the cookie pot and being able to reach out to these social media platforms and tell them what they want censored. Yeah, of course it's immense. It's much bigger than any of us even understand or can comprehend. And I guarantee you that there were ones that were not even released in his lawsuit, right, through discovery, where, there were probably even more that were able to censor things at will that didn't come out. And that's concerning, because that shows you how comfortable that administration felt with censoring the average American's freedom of speech.
And when Elon Musk buys Twitter, now X, they did the Twitter files, and you saw even more of it, right? Like, how these people were in charge of this stuff is insane.
What's interesting from just like a corporate governance point of view, like, let's say I'm Mark Zuckerberg, seems pretty liberal, but not maybe a liberal activist, but you spend 4 years getting attacked for censorship and you never say, actually, well, he did ultimately say, but he didn't say for years, I'm only doing this because the Biden people are pushing me to do it. Like, these companies were hurt by this, weren't they?
Yeah.
And here's the thing about that criticism. Like, he couldn't just come out and say that. Like, you would like to think that he would. But again, to my point, the scale, the amount of things that are uploaded to the platform, if he said that, they immediately would strike his publisher versus platform, right? He would then be automatically put into publisher mode, and then he's getting sued. It's just open season on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. And that's the biggest problem with it, is that there are much bigger implications if he did come out and criticize them, or he did raise his hand and say something illegal is going on here. Well, then he's going to suffer the consequences. And I think the system needs to be reformed in a way that that's not possible, because, again, freedom of speech is the number one most important thing. That is what the United States was founded on. That's the number one right for a reason. That's just how it is. And if you do not value that, then go move to another country and let me know how good it feels when you're trying to do something as innocuous as compare the president of your nation to Winnie the Pooh. Let me know how well that goes for you. You literally, they don't let you type it in on platforms. and you probably get swept up and, you know, put in jail. So like, again, it's just, there's a reason why it's the most important thing. And if you don't think so, go try and do something like that elsewhere. And then you'll see how valuable it is to have it in the US. Just look up the censorship that's happening in Europe right now. It's insane.
I think the Zuckerberg and the Facebook example is really interesting, because if you go back in time, if you get in the DeLorean here, a lot of people blamed Facebook for President Trump's election. Remember this?
Yes.
And I think then in the next election cycle, whether that was sort of internalized or not, Zuckerbucks materializes. So Zuckerberg is funding a lot of the voter turnout, privately funding election operations, which is kind of crazy, in 2020, and then gets sort of, you know, whether completely voluntary or steamrolled by threat of investigation, is part of then Facebook, very much a part of this censorship regime that existed. And now Zuckerberg seems to be like red pilled, I guess. I don't know how much of this is sincere from these big tech companies, or it's just because President Trump won. Time will tell. But it does feel like, my hope is that censorship is in retreat a little bit now.
So 2 points. Number one, the first thing that he was saying, where Facebook was essentially blamed for Trump being elected the first time, that goes back to the point that I was making, where it's, if your candidate doesn't win, you cry foul. Oh my God, there was election interference from Facebook. Oh, but again, that's the going back and forth, and you cry one way, you cry, and no one wants to just admit they lost, and it's so exhausting. Like and I'm sure it'll happen again in 2028, and it'll happen again in 2032, and on and on and on, forever and ever and ever, because everyone's a sore loser and a crybaby, and when the other person who they didn't vote for gets into office, it's the end of the world and the end of times, and it's going to be the end of the United States, and they're a fascist or they're a communist, or it's so tiring. But then to his second point, where he's talking about how it seems to be swinging the other way, where now they're more right-leaning and it's freedom of speech and this, that, and the other. I think in some instances, it's literally just them swaying in the wind and kind of going wherever, you know, it's basically like licking your finger, putting it up, and going whichever way the wind is blowing, right? So that, and in part of it is so you don't get your special privileges and favorable legislation removed. So I think that's part of it. But then the other thing is, for Zuckerberg, in his defense, if you have listened to any of this stuff, I mean, some of it is kind of hilarious, where it's like, I got a big chain on, and I got some suntan now, and my hair is all messed up, and I'm loose now. But I think it is just a true lifestyle change for him, where he's doing jujitsu, he's surfing, he's doing all these things and trying to remove himself from, you know, yes, he's still very involved in Facebook, but he has his own personal self-enrichment time as well. And when you hear him actually talk about the things that he's doing and how he's changed his life, and I believe he has bought into it. But I do think, to, you know, Eric's point here, a lot of times it is just, you know, again, licking your finger, putting it up, and going whichever way the wind is blowing. So I don't think all of it is genuine, but to give Zuckerberg some credit, yeah, I do think that his is genuinely a shift in philosophy, and now that Trump is in, he feels more freedom to allow people to say more or less what they want on his platform.
And that this renaissance you're seeing, that you talk about a lot on your show, the First Amendment and free speech, and how important that is to the fabric of this country, it really is the beating heart of our Constitution. The ability to say things that you might find incredibly offensive or even dangerous. Your ability to defend someone else's right to do that is really at the core of this American experiment. And we have to fight for that every, tooth and nail. And so that...
And I think that's a really important point as well, because that's what I always say to people. And that's why I don't have an issue saying whatever I say and just like, okay, let the chips fall where they may, is that I don't have an issue with other people's opinions. When they say that, you could tell me whatever you want. You can say, I've gotten in multiple heated exchanges in the past. Not to me, because again, to me it's it's water off my back. I really do not care. Whatever you say doesn't actually affect me. It's just words. But I feel like especially people who are left aligned view words as violence. How many times have you heard that? Where in schools, microaggressions and words are violence. No. Words are not violence. Violence is violence. And unless you've experienced violence in some respect, whether you've gotten in fights and what, if you are so snowflake protected that you think words are violence, you need to do other things to challenge yourself and basically interject some sort of adversity into your life. Because I can assure you words are not violence. And when someone says something to me, like I've gotten in conversations about a bunch of different topics that would be considered very volatile and highly politicized and people lose their minds over. But people say stuff to me, and at the end of the day, I can walk away and say, I don't care what you think, because it doesn't actually affect the laws. Whatever your opinion is, unless you're a congressperson or you have some actual power, the average everyday person's opinions should not matter to you at all, because they have no way to influence them, and the only thing that should matter to you is what the law is and are you abiding by the law. Because each person's individual opinion literally does not matter. So to get upset because someone has a differing opinion from you just completely blows my mind. And again, you're such a snowflake, if that's the case, that you need to go outside and do something hard, like actually difficult in your life, because you shouldn't be caring about other people's opinions whatsoever.
Lawsuit. I mean, you just think of the time. I was blessed to have a good team. John Sauer was my Solicitor General in Missouri. He's now the Solicitor General of the United States. The first 4 district judges that have been nominated in Missouri all worked in my office. There's another guy who worked in my office who's now
the first four all worked in your office?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
So the point, I think, again, why that time period was instructive, I think there's a forging that happens in that time of crisis. And when you come together and you fight the good fight and you come out on the other side, there's a lot of important work to do. Interestingly, also, I think RFK Jr. is a part of that. I mean, he was one of the guys originally censored. Now he's on the inside. And then another guy who was actually a plaintiff in Missouri versus Biden, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who's now the head of NIH. He's on the inside now. So again, I think the Democrats are just, they can't believe this is actually what happened. But
and he got hugely censored after he went on Joe Rogan and was essentially decrying the use of mRNA vaccines, which is, who knows if that's the exact reason why people had adverse health effects, but he went on there and was saying this shouldn't be used, and then he got censored. He got completely censored, and people were screaming for him to be deplatformed and dangerous misinformation, but now he's at the NIH. And so, again, that's the good thing about, in my opinion, Trump versus Kamala getting in, is that there are people who have been censored in the past, including RFK, who are able to now be in there, basically in the administration. And so I think that makes it much less likely that censorship will occur. And again, just to the example, Epstein, you can cover it as much as you want. No one's getting censored for it, at least that I've seen. Again, I've seen timelines full of Epstein memes, full of Epstein videos. I made my own videos about it. It's not being censored, which is more than you can say for what was going on during the Biden administration. And most likely, what would have continued to go on during Kamala's administration, which she even stated, how would you differ, when she was asked the question, how would you differ from Biden? She had absolutely nothing, no criticisms, so it just would have been more of the same.
Rebels are now kind of are doing some good things, I think, on the inside. Dr. Bhattacharya was one of the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration,
Yes.
which essentially said something so controversial, like there is a thing like natural immunity that can exist for COVID. They tried to wreck their careers. Anthony Fauci himself tried to wreck their careers. He was a well-accomplished Stanford, professor, and now he's running NIH. I think there's a lot of great symmetry to all that. But
all right, that about covers everything that I wanted to about this video. Again, I think it was very instructive to take a look back at what was going on, especially focusing on COVID and the Hunter Biden laptop. And those are two very real examples of how censorship was actively being enforced on citizens of the United States or anyone who is on these platforms that dared speak out against what essentially the regime, the Biden administration, was trying to say. And again, I do think there are certain instances where we should call out acts of censorship, right? I think the most pressing one today is if you are, it's not even full citizens, but if you are here, I think the most visible one is, and even Trump has, and the nice thing about it though, is he says it straight out, right? It's not this shadow banning kind of a thing going on. It is Trump essentially coming out and saying, if you're here on a student visa and you criticize Israel, well, then we're going to ship you out. Again, that is an impediment on free speech. So 100%, I'll be the first one to raise my hand and say that's not really fair and it shouldn't be handled in that way. But at least it's not being lied about. It's not being covered up. It's not a subversion of free speech that they do not want to admit. And so the positive with that is at least it's out in broad daylight. We can call it out when we see it, which I have in the past, right? That is something that I have been critical of. But warts and all, that's why I say that I am personally glad, even though I didn't vote for it, that Trump was elected versus Kamala Harris. And so when you look at that, again, and this is the thing that I always say, is that for each person, this is how you end up in one camp or the other, is you say, what is the thing that is most important to me? And you throw yourself entirely in that camp. And I think that's very misguided, because I think you should be able to articulate each one of your beliefs and why you think the way you do about it. But people just don't want to do that. They just say, oh, I'm for abortion, so I'm automatically a liberal. I'm automatically a Democrat. And so now I'm going to just take on and fight for every single thing that falls in that ticket. I can't have a nuanced conversation about the things that I believe in and say, you know what, on some things I'm here and some things I'm here. And I'm somewhere in the middle because I'm intelligent enough to formulate my own opinions on things, and I don't need to just go along with what one party says because I believe in one thing that they believe in. And so that is the thing that I think is most important. And if you can take anything away from this video, I hope that it is, hey, be open to other people's opinions, because again, at the end of the day, it doesn't affect you. And I think that's a very important message to take away. Obviously, I wanted to cover the free speech because I think that is the most important thing in the entire, that is foundational to what the United States is. And that is the most important thing when it comes to holding power to account. Even if it doesn't always happen in the ways that we wish, at least it keeps them from completely running us over. So that's why I think it is such an important thing. And there's a reason why it was the number one rule of the United States, is because I think it is the most important. But if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more of my content, if you appreciate what I do here, dropping a subscription really does help my channel, helps it grow. This is what I want to be doing, is creating content. And if you have made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.